So today we're doing a deep dive into something really remarkable. It's a story about high-stakes economics, geopolitics, and maybe one of the biggest cases of unintended consequences we've seen in a long, long time.
It's a fascinating case study for sure.
We're asking, how did this really aggressive push by the United States for economic control end up creating the exact opposite? I mean, a strategic realignment of the entire continent that pretty much bypasses U.S. influence.
It's such a critical lesson. All the sources we've looked at, they really detail this period starting back in early 2025. And they chart the completely unexpected fallout from these protectionist policies.
And here's the paradox we really need to unpack for you. The U.S., the country that basically architected modern free trade,
Yeah.
is now being systematically and, strategically bypassed by its two closest neighbors, Canada and Mexico.
Exactly. The stated goal was to use economic muscle to force changes. But the assumption behind it was just deeply flawed. Well, the administration saw the North American economy as three separate pieces. They thought you could just apply pressure on one part.
And the others would just fall in line.
Right. But that's not how it works. It's a single, highly integrated system, like one big machine. What you do to one gear affects everything else immediately.
So our mission today is to unpack the quiet but frankly game-changing details of this reversal. We're going to show you exactly how Canada and Mexico went from being reliable U.S. partners to creating this powerful coordinated trade path that literally runs around the United States. Let's trace the steps.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's get right to the trigger point. We have to go back to early 2025. What was the specific action that kicked off this massive shift?
The first move was, it was really sudden and sweeping. The USMCA trade deal was in place, but the administration declared it wasn't enough. They started tying trade to, completely non-trade issues.
And then came the tariffs.
Then came the tariffs. The sources are all clear on this. President Trump added a broad 25% tariff on almost all major goods coming into the U.S. from both Mexico and Canada.
25%. That's not a surgical strike, that's a sledgehammer. What was the official reason, the justification they gave?
It was framed as an urgent necessity. They declared a national emergency over fentanyl and migration. That was the hook.
And using that as the justification, they applied this massive economic pressure.
Yes, and that 25% figure wasn't random. It was designed to be tripling. The thinking was that the economic pain would be so immediate, so intense, that Ottawa and Mexico City would just rush to the negotiating table.
Ready to give in.
Ready to concede on basically everything.
But that's not what happened. If the goal was leverage, why did it backfire so badly on the U.S. itself?
Well, the failure really came from a complete the disregard for how modern supply chains actually work.
You mean just-in-time production?
Exactly. The White House was using a 20th century trade model. They didn't account for the fact that in North America, a single component can cross the border multiple times before a product is finished.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. Think of a car seat. It might be assembled in Mexico, but it uses foam from a Canadian company and, say, U.S.-made plastics.
Yeah.
That seat then gets shipped back to a factory in Detroit for final installation.
So with a flat 25% tariff, you're not just taxing the final car seat.
No. You're taxing the foam when it enters Mexico.
Sure.
You're taxing the plastics. Then you're taxing the finished seat when it comes back into the U.S. You're taxing the same value chain over and over again.
Wow. So it's not really a 25% tariff at all. It's effectively much, much higher.
Precisely. The tariff, which was meant to be this clever geopolitical weapon,
Yeah.
ended up acting like a massive self-imposed tax on America's own manufacturers. The damage was immediate and internal.
Which just pushed everyone to find a way around it.
It accelerated the isolation because the economic reality is integrated. It was a painful lesson.
Okay, so that sets the stage for the response, and this is where it gets really interesting for North American politics. How did Ottawa and Mexico City actually react to this pressure?
Well, the U.S. expected them to fold immediately, but that completely missed the political reality in both countries.
They couldn't afford to look weak.
No leader could. You can't be seen buckling instantly to that kind of threat. So instead of getting into a tariff war with the U.S., which would have just hurt everyone, they did something smarter. They started talking to each other.
And that's where this new strategic partnership comes from. This wasn't just a press release, was it? This was a serious long-term plan.
Oh, it was very serious. The goal was to systematically cut their reliance on the U.S. as a middleman.
So what were the practical pillars of this new alliance?
They were razor-focused on building resilient infrastructure, completely outside of U.S. control. So 3 key things: energy cooperation, diversifying their food trade, and maybe most importantly, building much better direct shipping links.
That infrastructure part is so crucial to understand, isn't it? For decades, the easiest way to move goods between Canada and Mexico was overland,
By truck or train, yeah.
which meant it had to go through the U.S. You had
Uh,
to deal with U.S. customs, U.S. regulations, and now U.S. tariffs.
And U.S. political unpredictability. That became the biggest risk factor. So now they're making these huge state-level investments in their own ports, their maritime capacity. They are building a permanent bypass.
And the sources point to specific routes.
They do. They talk about the rapid upgrades to ports in Vancouver and Prince Rupert in Canada. They're creating these high-capacity, dedicated sea lanes that go straight to major Mexican ports, like Manzanillo and Lázaro Cárdenas on the Pacific coast.
So you have Canadian goods wheat, potash, manufactured parts sailing directly to Mexico, bypassing the U.S. entirely.
And on the return trip, you have Mexican avocados, electronics, car parts all heading north. It's a whole new direct North American trade axis that just didn't exist at this scale before.
Which is just, it's fascinating to see how quickly the shift started to hurt the U.S. economy, the very economy the policy was supposed to be protecting.
And if you want to see the clearest example of that pain, you just have to look at the auto industry.
Ah, the famous Chevrolet Silverado example. It really does lay it all out perfectly.
It really does. I mean, think about it. When you slap a 25% tariff on imported parts, you're adding hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars to the cost of a vehicle that's assembled right here in the U.S.
Because a Silverado isn't just made in America.
Not even close.
Yeah.
It uses Canadian steel, Mexican wiring harnesses, parts from hundreds of different suppliers across the continent. So when those parts face a tariff at the border, that cost gets passed straight to the U.S. assembly plant.
And the result was predictable, I guess?
It was immediate. Factories slowed down. The prices of American-made trucks went up for the American consumer. And the jobs that were supposed to come rushing back, they just didn't.
It's the definition of an own goal. You make your own products more expensive and less competitive.
And while the U.S. was building these walls, what were Canada and Mexico doing? The exact opposite. This is a crucial detail. Their new partnership focused on removing barriers between each other.
Making trade easier.
So much easier. Streamlining customs, aligning regulations, launching shared digital platforms. Suddenly, it was cheaper and faster for a factory in Ontario to send parts to a plant in Puebla.
Then for a similar factory in Michigan to do the same thing.
Exactly. They created this frictionless trade zone that literally wrapped around the U.S.
And this wasn't just about manufacturing, was it? American farming, which is a huge political base for protectionism, got hit hard too.
A huge long-term hit. We saw Mexican markets for U.S. corn, soy, and dairy just evaporate.
But this is where the real damage is, right? It's not just about one lost sale.
No, it's about breaking trust, severing relationships that took decades to build. Mexico is now aggressively turning to new, more reliable suppliers.
Like Brazil and Argentina.
Brazil, Argentina, and even Canada, which is now more competitive because of the new logistics. And what's more, Mexico is building new port infrastructure, specifically designed to handle massive ships from South America. They're designing a system that no longer needs U.S. rail lines or U.S. ports.
And that's the key takeaway for you listening at home. Once a major buyer like Mexico retools its entire supply chain and locks in new partners, they don't just switch back when the politics change. That trust is broken, and it has a massive, massive price tag.
A huge price tag.
So if the economic fallout was that painful at home, what was the signal this sent to the rest of the world? I mean, we're talking at the wider geopolitical consequences here. The U.S. just pushed away a NATO ally and its most important neighbor.
And if we connect that to the bigger picture, well, that created a vacuum, and that vacuum was filled almost immediately.
Let me guess. China.
The China connection is the most critical detail here. As U.S. policy created all this uncertainty, it also created these big capital gaps in Mexico and Canada. The sources show a huge spike in high-level visits from Chinese officials to Mexico City and to Canadian provinces.
It's the ultimate irony, isn't it?
It's a perfect irony. A policy that was sold as being tough on geopolitical rivals ended up pushing two of America's biggest allies right toward China for investment and market access.
So you're seeing Chinese money flowing into projects that specifically avoid the U.S.
That's right. Into Canadian energy, critical minerals, into Mexican logistics and manufacturing that serves Europe and South America. And all of this fundamentally changes the business climate in North America.
Because companies are now choosing to build in Canada and Mexico, and not just for the usual reasons.
It's not about cheap labor anymore. It's about stability. Businesses absolutely hate uncertainty.
And right now, the U.S. looks like the uncertain player.
That's what the sources say. They call the U.S. the riskiest place in North America to invest. The threat of random tariffs, the regulatory whiplash. Why would you build $1 billion factory in Ohio if a single tweet tomorrow could cripple your supply chain?
That is a staggering thought. The country that built the global trade system is now seen as the most unpredictable player on its own continent.
We're also seeing this defensive move in the energy sector. Both Mexico and Canada are now actively trying to reduce their dependence on U.S. natural gas and fuel.
How are they doing that?
They're speeding up Canadian LNG export projects to sell to Asia and Europe. And they're making big joint investments in green energy that's integrated continentally, but independent of the U.S. grid.
So those energy links that took decades to build.
They are, in the words of one source, at risk of becoming unused. The whole policy just completely misjudged the ability of allies to find other options when they're pushed.
It's a profound foreign policy mistake.
It is. A strong America depends on having stable, friendly, economically tied neighbors. And trading that long-term strength for a short-term political win, it's just a huge net loss for the U.S. on the world stage.
Let's talk for a moment about the cultural effects, which the sources say can last longer than any tariff. What did this do at sort of the people-to-people level?
It basically amplified any existing resentment. In Mexico, you see a surge in political language about economic sovereignty, about building our own path away from the U.S.
And in Canada.
It's fueled calls for greater economic independence, for making Canada less vulnerable to the American political roller coaster. It becomes a matter of national pride.
And what's wild is that this pushback isn't just international. It's happening inside the U.S., too.
Absolutely. You have governors and state leaders in places like Texas, Arizona, Michigan. They are quietly but firmly pushing back against Washington.
Because they see the damage firsthand.
They know that losing that cross-border trade hurts their local economies, their tax base, their voters. They're stuck cleaning up a mess made at the federal level.
And let's close this section with one final small detail that just adds to the isolation: the digital advantage.
It sounds minor, but it's huge. In modern logistics, speed is everything. The new digital customs rules between Canada and Mexico mean their internal trade just flows faster. Less friction, less paperwork.
While the U.S. border becomes slower and more complicated.
Exactly. The U.S. has unintentionally added drag and delay to its own system, while its partners have built an express lane. In business, that's a major competitive edge to just hand over.
So if we synthesize all of this, the main conclusion from the analysis seems to be that a policy designed to make the U.S. stronger and more central has achieved the exact opposite.
That's the fundamental takeaway. The leverage the U.S. was seeking resulted in its own isolation. That vision of a united North America based on free markets is fading really fast as our allies build walls to protect themselves, not from the world, but from U.S. political volatility.
And the policy was sold as strength.
But it's a massive government intervention, and you have to remember who pays for tariffs. It's the U.S. importers. It's U.S. businesses and ultimately U.S. consumers. It's higher costs for Americans. But the biggest price here isn't even monetary.
It's the loss of predictability.
Loss of trust.
So that brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with. When a country effectively breaks the system it helped create, and its closest, most vital partners start building safeguards around it, what is the ultimate price of that unpredictability? What happens when trade stops following political demands and just finds a new, more reliable path? That is the profound and very costly reality the U.S. now has to face.